Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first Snam ESG seminar. Before starting, we will project a short video from Mrs. Cavatorta, chairwoman of Snam ESG committee, who will introduce today's seminar. She couldn't be here, so she sent this short welcome message. Then Marco Alverà, Snam CEO, will explain our ESG priorities and how they are embedded into our strategy. After, we will have dedicated session on our plans and key achievement on environmental, social, and governance issues. And finally, closing remarks with some case history on how we create value through sustainability. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for Q&A. If you want to submit a question, please use the chat. I will collect all the questions and submit them to the relevant speakers at the end of the presentation. So we can start with Mrs. Cavatorta video. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session of Snam's first ESG investor presentation. I'm Laura Cavatorta, chairwoman of the ESG committee of Snam, a committee that we proudly launched in 2019 as one of the first ESG committees of Italian companies. We are very aware that we are living in very turbulent times when companies are being called upon to be actors of change. A recent survey shows that 61% of the respondents see companies as the most trusted institutions of our times. And this is a big responsibility. The dramatic experience of the COVID pandemic has at least given us the opportunity to show our proximity to our employees and communities in conjunction with also our foundation, carrying out an important and compassionate work. The recovery will occur through green and digital transitions, which will be key factors in the next months and years for a sustainable future. And Snam is at the forefront of the energy transition. So the Snam's commitment to ESG issues can be seen throughout all the areas of our work, witnessed also by the time spent by myself and my fellow board members. We estimate 40% of our board of directors' time spent on ESG issues. Let me make some examples. A wide range of ESG objectives, from reducing the emissions to the increasing of women in managerial positions to the sustainable finance, is part of our short or long-term incentive systems, with an ever-increasing weight in the remuneration policy of management. We also introduced into our bylaws our purpose and the importance of gender diversity, which we will guarantee over time, even at the end of the national legal obligations. And then we launched an ESG scorecard covering 22 KPIs and many of the 17 SDGs. And let me say a word about our stakeholders who are really key to all we do. Through our work with them and thanks to their commitment, we are able to generate a broader impact on many ESG factors, reducing emissions, improving diversity, promoting the circular economy. So in a way, we are playing an important role in transforming a significant part of the small and medium enterprise landscape. Last but not least, I would like to add that we are proud also of our integrated and very rich reporting, which is something we work on to continuously improve and make it a useful tool for investors and other stakeholders to assess our performance. In short, we are working to make Snam a more diverse company that can respond to the urgent challenges of our times. Climate change, social well-being, whilst delivering value to our investors. Thus, I'm very happy to introduce this today's session to you all, and I'll leave the floor to Marco Alverà, who with his management team will take you through our key areas. And then, of course, there will be a time for a Q&A sessions at the end. So thank you, and thank you for your interest in Snam.
Thank you all for joining us, and good afternoon. Snam is a purpose-driven company. According to Aristotle, the purpose of each individual lies at the intersection between his or her talents and the needs of the world. The same is true for companies. And this is why 4 years ago, we interviewed dozens of colleagues at various levels in the organization to really come up and distill what we think are Snam's core talents on one side and the needs of all our stakeholders on the other. That's how we defined our purpose: energy to inspire the world. This starts from the observation that a lot more than just our engineering skills are necessary. And we've leveraged on 80 years of experience of technical expertise to position ourselves to deliver ample, sustainable, and affordable energy, intending to play a key role in the energy transition. An effective purpose strengthens a sense of belonging within the organization and over time generates superior commitment and therefore superior growth. Our purpose is also the North Star of our company. Finding one's purpose, though, is the first step. Then you have to make it concrete. It has to help define the values, set the strategy, and orient the day-to-day decisions in the execution and implementation of that strategy. Because of our purpose, ESG is fully integrated in everything we do. On E, our strategic plan is geared towards net zero, both our own net zero, thanks to our target to achieve Scope 1 and 2 carbon neutrality by 2040, and net zero of what we call the system of all our stakeholders. This we achieve not only by decarbonizing and helping decarbonize what will transit through our infrastructure, but also through our startups, our 4 new businesses that are focused on enabling our own customers to achieve their net zero targets as soon as possible. On S, the social front, we're focused on our people and our communities. We want to create an inclusive, diverse work environment that nurtures and develops skills, and we support communities through our work with the Snam Foundation on issues such as educational and energy poverty and equal opportunity for women. We believe well-being is a key factor of the S in ESG. We'll launch a world well-being movement later this year with other companies to promote the measurement of well-being, not only for our employees, but for society as a whole. We're also working with leading researchers on this key topic. On governance, ESG, as Laura just said, is integrated in our corporate processes to align our company with the interest of all stakeholders. Transparency and accountability are key pillars of our approach. In this context, we've launched an ESG scorecard with a 3-year timescale and subject to annual control and review. With our new ESG scorecard, we've set ambitious forward-looking targets on E, S, and G. On E, it's about natural gas emissions, energy savings, green innovation, land protection, and biodiversity. On S, it's about welfare, employee engagement, safety, gender diversity, responsible and sustainable supply chain, and local communities. On G, it's governance structure and its functioning, infrastructure reliability, anti-corruption. We will monitor all the KPIs and update the scorecard annually in the belief that only what gets measured gets done. Focusing on our approach on the environment, our pathway to net zero has 2 pillars. First of all, we've set a carbon neutrality target on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are under our direct control by 2040, with an intermediate target to reduce them by 50% by 2030 compared to 2018. About 10% of our 7.4 billion euro CapEx plan is devoted to net zero investments, of which the key ones are a methane leak detection and repair campaign to eliminate fugitive emissions and a program to substitute gas-fired compressor with electric ones. As well as reducing direct CO2 emissions, this will give us the opportunity to run essentially dual fuel gas and electricity stations, switching between gas and electricity based on the system requirements. Using, for example, our line pack to offer demand-side response and flexibility to the electricity network in times of need. We're also working with our suppliers and associates with a final aim to promote the reduction of their own emissions as well. This will, of course, reduce our Scope 3 emissions. The second pillar is our role of enabler and accelerator of system decarbonization. Globally, net zero can only be achieved if we grow the proportion of clean molecules in the system, alongside green electricity. A BNEF report suggests that up to a quarter of global energy needs will be served by hydrogen in a fully decarbonized system. Using the gas grid to deliver green gas enables and speeds up this transition while reducing its overall cost. That means that making sure the grid is hydrogen ready and working with the value chain, along the value chain, and policymakers to promote green gas is essential to reaching net zero. We expect emissions from transported gas to decline over time coherently with Europe's climate policies. In our long-term scenario, we foresee all the transported gas by 2050 to be either renewable or fully abated. We also contribute to the decarbonization of the system with our energy transition startups. We have built 5 companies which are establishing themselves as business leaders in energy efficiency, in biomethane, in sustainable mobility, and in hydrogen. On top of this, we've launched at the end of 2020 Arbolia, a benefit company that creates new urban forests in Italy for third parties. We're investing more than 700 million euros in these businesses and have calculated that it can avoid well over 800,000 tons of emissions per year as they reach scale. Looking more closely at our role in system decarbonization, we see a tripartite coexistence of methane, hydrogen, and probably CO2 transport and storage in our infrastructure in the long term. STET offers a vision, a study we've done offer a vision for the future role in a decarbonized Europe in what we call the EU Hydrogen Backbone Report that's been recently published with 23 gas infrastructure companies working in 21 different countries. Thanks to the availability of parallel pipelines, we will repurpose some lines in our backbone by 2030, depending on the relative demand and supply profiles for natural gas versus hydrogen. By 2030, the Italian backbone will stretch from Sicily up to the hydrogen valley of the Pianura Padana around Emilia-Romagna, supporting an accelerated development of hydrogen. There's also the potential to import hydrogen from North Africa, exploiting the cost advantage of solar production and land availability there. The report I mentioned, the EU Hydrogen Backbone Report, sees this infrastructure, this backbone, inching its way up north. By 2035, the connection to Austria may already allow hydrogen from North Africa to be used in Northern Europe. And by 2040, an interconnection to Switzerland could be added to provide another connection to Northwestern Europe, where green hydrogen made from solar in the south will meet and perhaps compete with green hydrogen made from wind energy in the north. Repurposing the European network will enable low-cost transport of vast amounts of hydrogen, adding between 11 and 21 euro cents per kilogram per 1,000 kilometers transported. These are very low costs compared to any other technology to move renewable energy around and to import renewable energy into Europe. This process will support the path to net zero by 2050 in the most cost-effective way, at the same time enhancing energy security. Turning now to the S in ESG, the social impact of companies is becoming increasingly important in these difficult times. We focus on our employees, our suppliers and stakeholders, and on the communities in which we operate. We have stayed very close to our colleagues during the pandemic. For instance, we've provided a range of initiatives from individual oxygen monitors to psychological counseling and even meditation courses aimed at improving their physical and mental health, as well as their overall well-being. These initiatives have been a natural extension of our actions in normal times, where we focus on the safety of our employees before anything else. on enabling an environment where diversity is valued and where every employee should be able and motivated to reach his or her full potential while balancing their overall well-being and life choices. Our suppliers are a natural extension of our organization, and through them we can multiply our ESG impact. Moreover, we focus on helping social sector suppliers and local suppliers enter our supply chain. Through Snam and the Snam Foundation, we work with our communities on issues that are important to them and where we can have a real impact, such as the protection of natural habitat, promoting STEM for young women, and addressing key social issues such as energy and educational poverty to ensure that no one is left behind. Turning now to the G of ESG. Sound corporate governance is key to execute a clear and sustainable development strategy. ESG is a core part of our governance. As Laura said, we've been one of the first companies in the world to introduce a fully dedicated ESG committee at the board level and to link a big part of the top management's compensation to ESG KPIs. Within the ESG scorecard, we undertook the commitment to dedicate at least 40% of our board's time on ESG matters, and in 2020, we've exceeded this target. Snam is the first company in the private sector to join the Permanent Commission representing business and non-government entities within OECD, and in 2020, we were ranked among the best Italian companies for corporate governance and integration of ESG factors in corporate strategies, according to the annual Integrated Governance Index survey carried out by Etica News and Top Legal. I would now like to introduce you to my colleagues who will take us through our work in ESG in greater depth. Patrizia Rutigliano heads our Institutional Affairs, Sustainability Communication, and Marketing team. Massimo Derchi runs our Italian regulated assets. Claudio Farina is in charge of innovation and ICT. Sofia Marudia is our ESG officer and heads the Snam Foundation. Alessandra Pasini, who most of you know well, is our CFO. Thank you for your attention for now. I'll hand over to Patrizia for a closer look at our emissions reduction strategy, and I'll be back for conclusions and Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Today, countries representing over 60% of global emissions have climate neutrality goals. The European Union was the first among the major economies to join the agreement, and where the European Green Deal has put energy transition at the core of its long-term strategy and of the recovery from the pandemic. This is reflected into the European Council proposal to increase greenhouse gas emission reduction goal from 40 to 55% by 2030 versus 1990, that will require a comprehensive rethinking of the European economies and policies and to include carbon neutrality in the climate law to make it legally binding objective. In addition, the Action Plan for Sustainable Finance has the goal to establish a financial system capable of promoting a sustainable development and refers, among others, to the improvement of the quality of non-financial reporting, to the need for institutional investors to include sustainability factors in their investment decision-making, and to a unified European classification system, the so-called taxonomy. All this policy push, along with the pressure coming from our society and investors, make the fight to climate change unrelenting. Going to our regulated businesses, Snam's Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions generated by our assets and operations were equal to 1,529,000 tons in 2018, which is our base year. Scope 1 emissions are the most significant ones and are made up of direct methane emissions and of CO2 emissions. Specifically, methane emissions are mainly generated by leakages across our pipelines, equipment and valves, while CO2 emissions are produced by gas combustion in our compression stations. Scope 2 emissions are very limited and refer to emissions generated indirectly by the use of electricity and steam produced by third parties. Going forward, we have defined a clear action plan to reach out ambitious targets on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Most significant interventions are, first, the revamping of 8 compressor stations with dual fuel compressors to reduce CO2 emission, as Marco anticipated before. Then, the use of a lead detection and repair program to reduce fugitive emission. We will deep dive on those technological measures with my colleague Massimo Derchi. Other interventions include installations of higher efficiency heaters, conversion of our company fleet, replacement of more than 3,000 pneumatic actuators, and increase in renewable electricity. Scope 3 are all the indirect emissions associated with a value chain of the company. Could you go to the next slide? According to the Greenhouse Protocol, the most significant are the emissions deriving from suppliers and from our associates, the ones on which we are now concentrating our efforts to define a reduction target. Today, we do not officially report the use of sold product, which amount to about 150 million tons, and this is because they are not under our control, because as TSO, we have only the duty to transport the gas we have been required to. What we can do to favor the progressive decarbonization is to prepare our infrastructure to cope with the rising percentage of green gases at the lowest possible cost. To go into detail, in order to reduce Scope 3 emissions, we will work on two pillars. First one, reducing emissions from the supply chain. Second, work and engage with our associates to support their efforts to decarbonization. Regarding suppliers, we are working on 3 aspects: the construction of a baseline of the effective greenhouse gas performance of our suppliers. Today, it is only estimated. Also, in order to capture and monitor their emission reductions over time. Share learnings and trainings, considering to increase the carbon weighting in our supplier selection process that currently is used in approximately 20% of the tenders. Going to our international associates, they are already on a virtuous path, which points to a 20% aggregated reduction by 2025. We continue to engage to share best practices, whilst also learning from them. I will now hand over to Massimo.
Good afternoon, everyone. If we look at the last 3 years, we have already achieved a significant reduction, abating Scope 1 and 2 by 15%. And methane emissions in particular were cut by more than 20%. We've reached this result by putting in place a large number of strong technological measures. Please go to the right slide, the one before. By putting in place strong technological measures, including the replacement of pneumatic instrumentation, valve actuators and heaters, as well as recompressing the gas when we have maintenance intervention. Next one, please. If we then consider the revamping of the compressor station, I would like to drive you through our action plan to reach our ambitious target. It is the next slide, if you can please move on. Okay, it's the following slide, which has the title Revamping of our compressor station, number 14, if you can please move to that. As I was saying, I would like to drive you through our action plan to reach the ambitious target we have on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions reduction. Yes, this one, thank you. This is made by very concrete action investment. Out of 10% of our 7.4 billion CapEx plan is related to investment to reduce the carbon footprint of our own operations. And the most significant intervention to reduce CO2 emission is the revamping of 8 compressor stations with dual fuel compressor. This means that alongside the gas compressing unit, which has a higher utilization rate, we will also install electric compressors. This, on one side, will reduce the gas we burn and therefore our emissions. And on the other side, will provide flexibility services to the electrical network, contributing to the sector coupling. Please move to the next slide. If we now focus on the leak detection and repair program, the key issue to remind is methane emissions do not depend significantly from gas volumes flowing into the network, but mostly by the gas infrastructure complexity. For instance, pipeline length, number of compressor stations, plants, components, etc. Through the leak detection and repair, the LDAR program, we will reduce methane emissions by carrying out monitoring campaign on plant components so that we can identify methane leaks and plan the maintenance works. To give you a sense of what we have done, in 2020, thanks to the application of the LDAR program in 120 plants with over 180,000 measures that we have already implemented, we avoided approximately 1 million cubic meter of methane emission in the atmosphere. The SNAMTech initiative, which is aimed at digitalizing the operation management of the SNAM district, is also a relevant and significant driver to tackle the methane emissions. Now, I would move to the hydrogen issue. And aside the interventions planned to reduce the carbon footprint of our operation, we are the most advanced TSO in assessing the hydrogen readiness of our asset. Our assets are made of approximately 33,000 kilometers of transport network, 22 compression stations, out of which 13 are to compress the gas into the network, and 9 are for storage, which means for compressing gas into the storage. And we also have 17 billion cubic meter of storage capacity in underground gas depleted fields. Assessing the readiness of the infrastructure to transport hydrogen needs, therefore need that we have to assess the readiness across the entire value chain. So pipelines, compression station, storage, etc. And I will go in more details on each of these parts of infrastructure. If we move on transport, we have defined internal technical standards for new pipelines, which are based on the international acknowledged standard, which is issued by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers on hydrogen piping and pipelines, the ASME code B31.12. And we are also assessing, using the same standard, the existing pipelines. 26,000 kilometers out of 32.5, as I mentioned earlier on, have been already verified, and we expect to complete the analysis very soon. We also have launched a project with RINA to certify the compatibility of a network for the transport of hydrogen by pipeline. The laboratory tests that we have performed so far have been successful, and further one will be done at higher pressures. Moving on to gas turbines and compressor, we are working to assess the level of compatibility with different blending percentages. Gas turbines are in general compatible with 10% blending, with no hardware modification required. Above 10%, some modification are needed, while if we go above 20%, specific machines are typically needed. As for gas compressor, they are fine with 5 to 10% blending, while for percentage of hydrogen above 10%, a rebundling of the compressor is typically required, while over 20%, the machine has to be replaced. Third step on underground storage. On storage, there is no technical literature or test on use of hydrogen in gas-depleted underground fields like the one we operate. Therefore, we have launched a study in cooperation with the maximum expert on these topics, Polytechnic of Turin and Italian Institute of Technology, with the aim to investigate, to simulate the physical, chemical, microbiological phenomena associated with hydrogen and natural gas blend storage in natural gas depleted fields. The first test we have accomplished have made us confident about the compatibility with 2% blends without any investment required. We are continuing our tests and studies, and we expect to complete them by mid-2022. I will now hand over to Claudio.
Thank you, Massimo, and good afternoon to everyone. Digitalization and artificial intelligence applied to industrial assets and operation can play a key role also in reducing emissions. Here in the slide, you can see 4 examples. Go to the next page, please. The first one is our new pressure intelligent monitoring system, also called PIMOS, that will be active in the Bologna district by June. This system collects and processes through artificial intelligence algorithms the operating data of the network, detecting any variation of the critical parameters, and will enable us to detect any losses within a few seconds, locating them with an accuracy of a few meters. Another promising artificial intelligence application is the one we plan to implement on our gas turbines. After having collected since the end of 2019 a huge amount of data on our gas turbines, we are now working on an algorithm to optimize the turbine setup in order to reduce consumption and emissions. This will also enable predictive maintenance. Furthermore, in Istrana, one of our compression stations, we have a pilot project for the implementation of a predictive model to forecast and reduce emission of the specific plant. Finally, through end-to-end processes reengineering and implementation of robotized automation programs at corporate level, we have reduced the number of printed pages from 14 million to 3 million per year in 3 years. Next page, please. Key technologies enabling digitalization of operations are artificial intelligence, industrial IoT, and cloud. The application of these technologies will enable Snam to manage 100 times the volume of data versus today through a central layer composed by hybrid cloud and physical infrastructure on our premises, and more than 600 units of edge computing with local computing power distributed on the field that will run artificial intelligence algorithms closer to the operations. On top of these, more than 30,000 devices will be connected and will gather data that will support the optimization of plants and pipelines, setups, and operating conditions, thus enabling consumption and emission reduction. I will now leave the floor to Sofia.
Thank you, Claudio, and good afternoon, everyone. The S in ESG has always been an important factor for Snam, even more so in a year such as 2020. Let me start with our key priority, safety. We are proud of our safety performance that has improved year on year, reducing the number of incidents significantly. In 2019 and 2020, we had 0 employee incidents in our regulated businesses and a reduction from 7 to 5 incidents in our non-regulated businesses and from our contractors. Unfortunately, we did have 1 fatal incident from a contractor in 2020, as you can see from the rise in the severity index, The first findings point to human error, but we are awaiting for the outcome of an investigation involving our contractor. The overall improvement, however, of our safety results are the result of our constant investments in new safety procedures, in increased measurements of new misses, and of a culture that aims for zero incidents always. Our future focus will be, on the one hand, to digitalize our procedures and introduce new technology to further increase safety levels. For instance, smart PPE with sensors and anti-collision systems installed on our operating machines. Our focus will also be on maintaining our zero incident record within our regulated businesses and on extending our knowledge and culture to align our new businesses and contractors even further on this. Though these new businesses will undoubtedly present new challenges, we are confident that we can bring them to Snam standards, and as such, we include them from the outset in our remuneration targets over and above what we have of our peers. Safety is and remains our number one priority. But let me move to another important aspect of the S in ESG, which our CEO also touched upon, well-being. In this unprecedented context that has been 2020, Snam has distinguished itself both by providing uninterrupted gas flows and full commercial and technical availability of the grid, and by assuring the safety of its people. We adopted special protocols for essential staff working in our centers and switched all non-essential employees to working from home. But over and above their safety, we have taken our employees' well-being very seriously. We've launched several initiatives aimed at making working from home as seamless as possible, providing smart working equipment and organizing online gatherings at regular intervals to keep up the sense of belonging community that characterizes our workforce. We have also provided medical and psychological support, non-financial aids such as virtual gym membership, and financial aids such as the reimbursement of child mending expenses to help our people deal with these practical problems deriving from this extraordinary situation. Finally, we focused on our employees' overall development, and despite the pandemic, we reached record levels of training sessions on a wide range of subjects. The lessons that we have learned and are still learning will be precious for when we also return to a more normal setup that we hope to get to as soon as possible, with a continued focus on remote working and employee well-being. And in fact, well-being for us is the key of the S in ESG, as our CEO mentioned, and we want to take this beyond our employees to our stakeholders and beyond with the launch of the World Wellbeing Movement later this year. Turning to diversity and inclusion, this is a key area of work in Snam. We work to ensure that Snam is a welcoming workplace for everyone, reflecting the diversity of the society that we live in. For the last few years, gender diversity, for example, has been a key area of work, with KPIs inserted not only in our management objectives, not only in our ESG scorecard, but also in our remuneration plan. Specifically, 10% of our long-term plan is linked to a higher annual percentage of women in leadership positions. We also work to promote equal opportunity for girls, thus starting from the younger generations with programs that we run in schools and universities with an emphasis on STEM. For example, we have mentoring programs and have just granted 9 STEM scholarships for young women at university. Of course, our work does extend far beyond gender. We work within our supply chain to include suppliers that employ persons with disabilities, and have also inserted this objective in our ESG scorecard. The same social enterprises are also included in a training program led by our employees to develop further their businesses. And finally, we take pride in raising these issues with our employees. Just the latest example was a week-long inclusion week that we held, where over 1,000 employees participated, and we saw lively discussions on various topics such as LGBTQ biases, racial diversity, and disability. For my last slide, last but not least, just a few words on our foundation. Our foundation was launched in 2017 and has already touched many people's lives and livelihoods. We work to leverage our know-how and networks to multiply our impact, involving both our employees but also our suppliers in most of what we do. Our employees are in fact our largest asset, and over 1/3 of them are annually involved in the work our foundation does. The foundation has 4 key issues it focuses on: the environment, specifically on the issues of energy poverty and forestation, the issue of educational poverty, specifically on school dropouts and on rising NEET levels, female empowerment, as I mentioned before, and well-being, which we've also already touched on. Last but not least, the past year was one where we extended our reach and focused together with our corporate on the persons for whom the lockdown was harsher than others. For example, we worked with women who were suffering domestic violence, the elderly who could not leave their homes to access food and medicine, the children who were not able to follow or fully follow distance learning. Through this enormous effort and the generosity of Snam towards its foundation, we had an impact on over 700,000 persons. So that's all on the S of ESG for now. Happy to pass the floor to our CFO, Alessandra Pasini, who will take us through transparency and reporting within Snam.
Thank you, Sophia, and good afternoon, everyone. Integrated reporting starts from integrating thinking, and our approach aims at responding to the request of all stakeholders by means of an extensive, transparent, complete corporate reporting. Thanks to the publication of several specific reports, Snam provides an up-to-date and in-depth views of its activities, performances, and future objectives. Between the main corporate documents, there are few that I mentioned. The Sustainability Report, that is an annual document that Snam has been publishing on a voluntary basis since 2006. With this document, the company aims to inform a wide and diversified audience of stakeholders of its choices, activities, results, and employment in the ESG space. The non-financial statement annexes to our financial report, which deals specifically with the environmental aspect of health and safety, personnel management, anti-corruption, and the protection of human rights, in compliance with the requirement of Italian Legislative Decree 254 of 2016. In compliance with the recommendation of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, well-known CCFD, Snam publishes since 2018 a document which describes Snam activities in relation to climate change issues. Our sustainability report is prepared in accordance to the GRI standards. From 2020, following suggestion of some lead investors, it has been included a reconciliation table between GRI and the relevant SASB metrics. As you know, our investments are on a growth path driven by the replacement cycle and rising investments in energy transition. Infrastructure investments have a significant effect on GDP, and we want to continue supporting our economies. As such, we've set a target in our ESG scorecard to increase the percentage of non-public procurement from local SMEs from the current 37% to up to 50% by 2023. Looking at the breakdown of our CapEx, we have carried out a thorough analysis supported by a third-party opinion by DNV, which suggests that at least 40% of our total CapEx is taxonomy aligned on the basis of the TEG report and delegated acts. Final version of the delegated act is expected shortly, and according to the information we have so far, we do not expect any harmful variation to the articles of the delegated act that are relevant for our projects. On September 2020, the UN Global Compact CFO Task Force, of which Snam is a founding member, launched the integrated UN-backed principle for SDGs, investments, and finance. The principles seek to guide companies in aligning their sustainability commitment with credible corporate finance strategy and create real-world impact on the SDGs. Members of this task force pinpoint 4 key areas that are relatively underserved but critical for SDG-aligned investments: SDG impact and measurement, integrated SDG strategies and investments, integrated corporate SDG finance, and integrated SDG communication and reporting. The principles were co-developed by 34 companies from 14 countries spanning across various industries. We believe that they will have a crucial role in supporting companies in their transition to sustainable development, creating a common language and greater consistency. Finally, we have constantly worked to increase the share of sustainable finance out of our total available funding, in compliance with our broader ESG vision. In 2020, Snam had raised circa 1.7 billion of new sustainable finance instruments, including transition bonds, issued in June and December, and some commercial paper under our ESG-rated commercial paper program that has been labeled as such by a third-party opinion. That effectively allow us to reach a total amount of approximately 7 billion, that is circa 40% of our total commitment funding. As indicated during our last strategic plan, our ambition and target is to increase this percentage up to 60% by 2024. I will now hand over to Marco for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Alessandra. So hopefully we've been able to share with you the degree to which sustainability and ESG is embedded in our strategy and is part of the way not only we work, but also the way we run Snam. We believe that sustainability is also a powerful value driver, and we have some interesting case histories to share with you. First of all, the strategic role our infrastructure has to deliver net zero boosts the growth and longevity of our assets and their long-term value. We're building positions for the energy transition upstream and downstream of our core midstream assets, and we've selected promising investment opportunities with accretive returns that we couldn't otherwise see in the market. We've contributed, for example, to the delivery of TAP on time with a very complex infrastructure project facing, as you may recall, severe local opposition. That project would never have been built in time without establishing a constructive relationship with the local communities and applying what are now the benchmark for world-leading technologies to minimize the environmental footprint. One of the most important KPIs for management is the well-being and satisfaction of our employees. And these are the ultimate judges of how well we're doing as managers and how the company is doing overall. And so we're very happy and proud to be ranked among the best companies to work for in the Forbes global benchmarking. And we're the second in Italy, just behind Ferrari. Our leadership in ESG is reflected in our governance and into the share of ESG investors present both in our equity and in our debt. This not only gives us access to a larger pool of investors, but fosters a constructive engagement with financial operators that care about the long term the same way we do. I would close by saying that there's no conflict between profits and ESG, and ultimately ESG will lead to superior and more sustainable growth in profits as well as in dividends. Thank you very much for your attention so far. We're happy to take and start answering some questions. So the first question I have here is from Roberto Rainieri from EMI. The question is, ESG and value deliveries, how do you assess the contribution of ESG strategy to value to shareholders? Well, I would say as you've seen from these last examples, the idea that our network, as Massimo said, has a 70% hydrogen readiness gives greater value to that network. As we address the replacement of the network, it becomes even more pressing to start replacing parts of the network. It gives us growth, it gives value, and not only in a defensive way, but we're able to enter new businesses that are in a way linked. Maybe energy efficiency is less linked, but biomethane, hydrogen, sustainable mobility, they physically touch our infrastructure. And by doing so, they not only create superior value for that infrastructure, but they're also businesses where we can play a big role. And as we offer decarbonization solutions for our customers, that's an additional growth lever. So I think ESG creates value in the sense that it de-risks our conventional business and it adds new businesses. So ultimately, ESG means growth, superior growth for shareholders, underpinning the dividend and creating growth on top of that. Another question is Your storage facilities could be used for CCS. I think that's a question. If your storage facilities could be used for CCS, is there life for blue hydrogen? So yes, indeed, for sure, reservoirs can be used for storing CO2. The actual capture and transport of CO2 is not complex, nor is the storage, I must say. So there's no technical complexity. CCS is not a technology. CCS is really a process. And we've been handling methane for 80 years. We know how to store methane. We know how to produce methane, and really transporting and storing CO2 is not so different. Rules will have to be written for it, but we know that our experience and expertise and technology can be very helpful in this respect. I think, like anyone who's looked at the net zero models, that without CO2 reduction, sequestration, and storage, without perhaps even direct air capture to take CO2 and store it, there's no way we can get to net zero in time. So CCS is going to be a big part of the global net zero effort. Local opposition may well arise when it comes to storing CO2. There's a lot of work that has to be done to reassure people that CO2, whilst it does have some safety issues because it takes away oxygen from the air, so there are safety issues, but we have to reassure people that CO2 in itself is not the problem. CO2 is only a problem if it gets into the atmosphere. So there's no real issue with storing CO2, notwithstanding the technology. There may remain some opposition, which is why offshore is probably more likely to happen than onshore in the near term. And that's also why I see potentially down the line a market for traded CO2 or people in third countries to offer the opportunity to store CO2, let's say, in other countries. Wherever there's a depleted field, CO2 can in some cases also be used to enhance oil recovery, like is happening in the US quite successfully. Another question, the third, is China possibly adopting an environmentally friendly economic growth could affect the energy trend. Could China's adopting an environmentally friendly economic growth affect the European transition in Europe? Yes, I think this is very good news. We've all read about Secretary Kerry's, John Kerry's recent efforts in China with his counterpart, the Chinese climate envoy, who was his counterpart also for the climate accord. So there's an established, successful working relationship there. I think China committing to net zero, even if by 2060, is very important. What's even more important is what happens in the 2020s. I think China getting to net zero makes some of the difficult trade discussions easier. Some of the carbon border adjustments that Europe will need to make, for instance, green steel, could be easier. And ultimately, we all know we need global CO2 taxation. It doesn't mean a global CO2 price, which I don't see happening quickly. But the more countries commit to net zero and the more countries commit to having some form of CO2 taxation or pricing, the faster technologies will develop. So for instance, for hydrogen, we need electrolyzer technologies to come on stream as soon as possible with lower costs. And I think having China fully on board can only contribute to that acceleration. There's another question that asks if we could share the component as a percentage of ESG investors in our floating capital. I think, but Francesca, correct me if I'm wrong, there's about 35% of our institutional investors, which make up around 50% of our share capital, 34% of that 50% we use the NASDAQ classification. That's a methodology. That means that 35% of this 50% based on NASDAQ classification is ESG, in the sense that they have kind of integrate ESG into their valuation when making their investment decisions. Is that correct, Francesca? Anyway, I think it is. There's another question that says that how aware the Italian regulator is of ESG importance when setting regulation or approving CapEx. So the CapEx plan is approved or seen both by the regulator and government. Government is, of course, as you may have seen, very focused on ESG, very focused on net zero, and the establishment of a single decarbonization or energy transition ministry is very positive, because that pulls together the skills and responsibilities of the environment ministry with the economic and energy ministry into a single ministry. That is very helpful, and I think the regulator is very aware of the challenges in getting to net zero, and also the challenges in getting to a 2030 target, which will be very ambitious for Italy, 55% reduction, as for the rest of Europe. I think there's a question on whether green finance is reducing the cost of debt. I think the answer now is that green finance is not more expensive than other finance, but over time we expect that green finance will mean lower cost of funding, and I think banks are aligning to this approach. I don't know, Alessandra, if you want to add something to this, and I don't know, Francesca, if you've received any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. No, I think on the sustainable finance, I think that liquidity will gradually shift, and that will dictate probably an improvement on terms vis-a-vis non-sustainable finance. But today, it's a very marginal differential, the one that we see.
Francesca, do we have any other questions? We can't hear you, Francesca. I still can't hear you. I don't see. Oh, I see. Alessandra, I see there's a question on. I see there's a question on the how green finance. I'm not sure I understand this question. Enrico Bartoli is asking us how green finance is helping Snam in our sustainability and business plan targets, and what's the impact of green finance on the cost of capital over the coming years. I think we've answered that, and there's a follow-on question. How the recent change in the bylaws implemented by Snam will help the company focus on sustainability, and more details on Arbolia, and which is the geographical target of the company. So Arbolia is mainly in Italy. Arbolia will be planting 3 million trees. That's the target we have. There's a lot of discussion on nature-based solutions and how they will play a role in the offsetting. I think rules will need to be determined and written on this. When it comes to the changes in the bylaws, I think you heard loud and clear from Laura Cavatorta that the board is fully committed to this. We have the ESG scorecard. We have the purpose in our bylaws. We have the ability now to do new businesses that, frankly, we could do even with the older bylaws, but the new businesses with the old bylaws were only a consequence of our core business. Now they have their own dignity as new businesses. And I think we have embedded in our bylaws also the diversity with a greater effort and emphasis on gender parity. So I think I don't see any additional questions. Sophia, Francesca, do you see any additional questions? No, I think I'm getting the all clear. There's no more questions. So thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. As always, if you have any further questions, you know where to reach us, and hopefully we've been able to convey how central ESG is to everything we do. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.